Welcome back to the Bitcoin Treasuries podcast. I'm Tim Kotzman. I'm here with Norma Chu, CEO of DDC Enterprises. Norma, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Tim.
Can you start off with a little bit of your background and your journey to Bitcoin? I've always find it's an interesting story, right? Every single one of us has a story of how we first heard about Bitcoin.
Sure. Well, I'll start with my background first. My career started in banking in Seattle, Washington, where I grew up. And I was an investment banking analyst in tech banking back in the early 2000s. So quite a number of years ago. Then after a couple of years of investment banking, I moved back to Hong Kong. And then I switched over to do equity research. And I was doing that for about 8 years. I was a generalist. What that means is essentially, I covered a broad spectrum of companies across different sectors. And then after doing that for about 8 years' time, I was the head of equity research at HSBC Private Bank. But then that year, I also found my passion in food, and I created and founded this company now called DDC, and has been on an entrepreneurial journey ever since.
Was it someone in your personal life that kind of started talking to you about Bitcoin, or did you see it in some other way?
Yeah, I mean, I've really been spending a lot of time in Hong Kong during the early part of building out DDC. And so I remember it was in 2021, that particular year, a lot of Bitcoin capital and also Bitcoin talents migrated from mainland China market to Hong Kong. And I think that particular year, Bitcoin also became a bit more mainstream, right? With Tesla making like $1.5 billion of purchase in Bitcoin, and other major credit card companies started coming out and doing, other crypto solutions. That was the year where I came across Bitcoin, got interested in it with my own finance background. I thought it was a great investment. And that's when I started on a personal level. And of course, like when I look back, you always wish that you started sooner and you did more. But that was my, very first, I would say, a mini orange pill, if you will.
Got it. And then what was the journey of really contemplating a Bitcoin treasury and incorporating Bitcoin more, first in the personal sense and now in the corporate sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different how I started thinking about accumulating Bitcoin for DDC. Very specific, September last year, late summer, and I was in Shanghai at a Blue Bottle coffee shop. And I was catching up with a long-term friend, and he's been an investor in DDC for 10 years. I mean, he's really watched me grow the company from my 300 square feet apartment in Hong Kong to listing it on the New York Stock Exchange. He's seen it all, right? And he himself has been a very influential Bitcoin investor for a number of years. We were catching up. I was telling him all the different acquisition opportunities that we see as a listed company in the US in the food sector. And from time to time, we've been buying and acquiring companies every 12 to 18 months or so. But he and I became really good friends because he always challenges my thinking. He always pushed my boundaries. And so he's like, Norma, that's great. You got all these growth opportunities, but you should really think outside of the box and consider acquiring digital assets, in particular Bitcoin. And I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity of my personal exposure in Bitcoin in 2021. Otherwise, I think like for a lot of CEOs, that would have just gone over their head, right? It's like, what are you talking about? But he was the first person that really pointed me to study Strategy's playbook and kind of go down that path of understanding what an accumulation strategy means and what it means by creating sustainable, significant long-term value for shareholders for a listed company. And so, I spent a couple months really studying Saylor's playbook and understanding the accumulation model. And it became very clear that, it is the best way, especially for microcap companies like, DDC is in this category, to build long-term shareholder value. As, my background being an equity research analyst, I always look at investment, whether in different category, different asset class, different sector. I like to, boil things down into very easily understandable concepts, because I think that's what's going to catch on when I pitch it to other people, maybe my stakeholders or my board members. And for me, it's just like three simple points about Bitcoin that stands out, right? I mean, not to preach to the choir here for all the audience that follow your podcast. Scarcity, it is the best way for a business owner, I believe, to defend ourselves against inflation and all kinds of counterparty risk. Secondly, consistency. It has outperformed all the asset class for such a long period of time, consistently year after year. That's a tremendous track record. And finally, it's just about staying power, right? It's not just here for a couple of years, but Bitcoin has really survived so many different market cycles and it continues to grow. I think those points, as a fundamental analyst myself for so many years, is like, all right, this is a great asset to put the hard-earned money that we generate every year as a company behind. And that's when I was ready to present to the board. And I think those are the core reasons, behind supporting, first convincing myself and really committing to this strategy, and then bringing it to not only my board, but now to my existing and also new investors, that why Bitcoin accumulation strategy is so important and critical for DDC going forward.
Got it. And can you share with us how you went about talking to, maybe educating your board, other executives, advisors, as you said, stakeholders, and then from there, what questions or objections or challenges did you have, if any, with the board, other executives, and what questions do you still probably receive today from investors and shareholders?
Yeah. I did my homework and really thought deep into not just the strategy and how can it really benefit the underlying business going forward. And I was kind of prepared for a very tough discussion with the board, right, in February this year. But I was very fortunate, like my board member, with the exception of one independent board member, which he recently joined us in November of last year, but he himself is from another Bitcoin mining company, so he is a industry, a veteran as himself. So I was very lucky, didn't need to do any education or convincing on that front. But for my other independent director, they're more like decades long of consumer veteran. And for me to win them over is really, first of all, I'm like, okay, this is how I see this as a class. You do your homework and don't just listen to me, right? And I point them to different readings and different podcasts that I've been doing on my own, different kind of research. And secondly, I was able to really think about, okay, aside from just accumulating Bitcoin, and I look about 2-3 years down the road, DDC having, tens of thousands, hundreds of that, tens of thousands of Bitcoin. How does that impact the underlying food business? And we've been talking to industry partners and potential stakeholders. One thing that I think is really interesting for Bitcoin to play a part down the road in the consumer sector is it could be a form of Bitcoin reward system that we will launch later this year that can really help us engage and kind of mobilize the millions of consumers we have in the market today. And so with that, my consumer background board director actually thought that is an amazing opportunity, because they not only see the upside of just having a lot of Bitcoin on the balance sheet for a listed company, but at the same time, it could be a very disruptive way for consumer brands to grow. And so I think that was my way of winning the board over, really thinking not just from a surface level, how do we accumulate Bitcoin on the listed company platform, but does it have any synergies with the underlying business? And nowadays, when I talk to investors, I'm really grateful when I meet investors that ask me about, okay, is Bitcoin going to be beneficial to your underlying business? And that's a kind of refreshing conversation, right? I think being where the market is at right now is understandable. A lot of the investor attention and fund flow is really towards the velocity and the commitment into Bitcoin stacking, which is critical. But from time to time, I do get some investors asking about, okay, what do we see in the medium long term? Can there be benefits of owning a lot of Bitcoin on your balance sheet? How that impacts your underlying business? And so I think being able to articulate that vision in the medium to long term is important, because I think everybody knows what the opportunity is, right? Not just today, but 6 months, 6 years from now. But I think having that deeper level of thinking, whether we own a lot of Bitcoin alone or it has other, peripheral benefits to your underlying business, is really going to help differentiate players in the medium to long term, whether we can ride out not just the upside on just gaining on the upcycle, gaining the upside of holding Bitcoin, but during down cycle, how do we think about being able to build that moat and more defensive mechanism against what we're trying to build here?
I guess I'm so curious because there's a lot of talk about what Strategy, formerly Microstrategy, might do with how much Bitcoin they are stacking, right? 500,000, 600,000 plus Bitcoin. Do you, and how it's this pristine collateral that you could do several different things with. Could you expand at all on what sort of frameworks you talk to your stakeholders about in that medium to long term? As you said, not necessarily the price appreciation or even the pullbacks in price action, but what that might mean several years out, whatever medium to long term might mean in this context.
Sure. I mean, there are so many possibilities. I mean, for us, near term is definitely just focusing heads down, commitment on stacking execution. But I think in the medium and long term, having such a tremendous amount of assets and valuable assets on your balance sheet does a lot to your growth opportunity. So I'll give you an example. Like as a listed company, prior to IPOing and after listing, being able to have this, trading currency, liquid currency, is a great way to win over partners for roll-ups, right? For acquisitions opportunity. And imagine being in the food sector, having tradable liquid shares as a currency to do negotiation for M&A, but also having it as a Bitcoin proxy is incredibly attractive for any partners that we talk to now, right? In the food business. They're like, okay, well, we're doing the same thing. We're generating profits, right? We want to be a part of a bigger platform going forward. But aside from just being exposed to the food sector alone, being partnered with DDC, we also get the upside of, potential Bitcoin appreciation. That is an incredible negotiation tool. Not only that we have done before with our M&A, just by being listed, but now having this additional potential upside that we can share with business partners down the road brings a lot of opportunities. But of course, like in the near term, we also have to think about, does that mean we only acquire businesses or do roll-up strategies by pure share issuance? Or could it be like Bitcoin back financing, right? It could be a mixture or a hybrid, which we don't have the answer to right now. We don't need to have the answer right now. But what is absolutely certain is having the Bitcoin exposure as a listed company in itself, the treasury is going to be extremely valuable and presents a lot of long-term defensible upside for a shareholder. But at the same time, it's extremely attractive for our potential, M&A partners down the road.
Definitely. This might be a little bit of a risky question, but in several press releases, it said, certainly you're the first female Bitcoin Treasury CEO. What does that mean to you, and what message might you have for everybody listening?
Like I am extremely just, I don't know how to say, like, I never thought of it that like, oh, I'm the first female CEO to do this. I just thought like, this is a great thing to bring on to DDC. And it is my duty to always find the best opportunity, right? Strategically for the company going forward. And so I think this is the best thing, right? Ever. And then some of my friends brought up to me as, oh, you're going to be the first female CEO to do this globally. Cool. I mean, same thing as I would say, I would do this comparison. I mean, 10 years ago, 13 years ago, when I founded DDC, people always say, oh, female founders are also really rare. There's also little capital VC funding that goes to female founded businesses. But, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs. I think Bitcoiners are Bitcoiners. I don't look at it whether we're female or gender specific. It's just a great opportunity, and I think I'm just a founder here, presenting this opportunity, executing on it, hopefully to create a tremendous amount of value for my shareholder going forward. That's how I would look at it. But having said that, I do feel that I have been extremely lucky and felt very welcomed and also embraced by the entire Bitcoin community. And it in ways like above and beyond my expectations. So I'm just really grateful to be part of this ecosystem and to be able to share this journey with, any platforms that welcome me to share my journey. So also really grateful to be here as well to share my story with you today.
Of course, that's awesome. Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp leads this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of one institution or complex private keys, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated, cold storage, multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent, institutional-grade custodians. No single custodian can move funds by themselves, providing an unprecedented level of security that traditional custody solutions simply can't match. Protected by a $100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, all transactions are fully auditable on-chain, never rehypothecated, and executed only at your explicit direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all times. Beyond custody, OnRamp delivers comprehensive Bitcoin financial services, including lending, trading, inheritance planning, IRAs, and more. OnRamp functions as your private banking partner, coordinating key holder activity, removing technical burdens, and providing a personalized, trust-minimized experience tailored to your specific wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps secure generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. Visit onrampbitcoin.com today to learn more, sign up, or book a free consultation with their team of Bitcoin custody experts. Are you looking for comprehensive analytics on corporate Bitcoin adoption? Strategy Tracker delivers real-time insights into how companies are executing their Bitcoin strategies completely free. Monitor NAV premiums, cost basis performance, and track how corporate Bitcoin treasuries perform against the market. Upgrade to premium for just $3.99 a month and unlock exclusive benefits like detailed market rankings, real-time trading volume analysis, and advanced performance metrics for corporations embracing Bitcoin. Apply code KOTZ at checkout for 100% off your first month of premium. Strategy Tracker is your essential tool for measuring the effectiveness of corporate Bitcoin strategies. Visit strategytracker.com and gain the analytical edge in understanding the Bitcoin Treasury phenomenon. Join us at the Win in Las Vegas, February 23rd through the 26th, 2026 for Bitcoin for Corporations. Use code KOTZ when you grab your tickets at strategy.com, and we'll see you there. So you mentioned Seattle, you mentioned Hong Kong. Can you walk us through which markets DDC is currently listed on and walk us through some of that?
So, on the operating business, we're primarily focusing mainly on China market. We also have business in the US, but we are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. But I think one thing that is interesting about DDC in terms of our positioning is because we have such a strong roots in Asia. So we resonate with a lot of potential Chinese investors, Asian investors, because they are familiar with DDC as a household name. I started this company building, online content and like communities around cooking. And so it was a very household name and household brand. But now, a lot of investors view DDC not only being that, food sector vehicle, but also having the opportunity to give them exposure not only to the US market, but also to Bitcoin is definitely very interesting. And I think that's a unique positioning where we can kind of bridge a little bit of the East and West exposure, bringing traditional lifestyle and consumer sector, but adding the Bitcoin excitement to it, I think is a great place to be.
You mentioned the strategy playbook. Would you say so far you are kind of framing it as you're looking to largely kind of follow that playbook, or some other companies have kind of messaged that they're looking at an alpha strategy and a beta strategy and just doing different things? Would you kind of characterize DDC as following the strategy playbook, or a little bit different from that?
I think the general core of the framework is very similar, where we are definitely actively engaging with capital markets through debt and equity offerings to kind of fuel our accumulation strategy. But at the same time, us being entrepreneurs, we always want to be creative. We're always looking for ways to do things differently. And I think some things that we are actively looking into and see whether we can kind of scale those kind of opportunities is really partnering with, looking at ways to kind of acquire Bitcoin in a more efficient and effective way, aside from just buying in spot market. And so I think that's kind of the area that we're exploring right now for DDC. But I think the core, especially with such an early stage, we're still very early on in our journey. Definitely similar to the playbook, but from time to time we look at the resources that we have available to us that is unique to DDC and see how we can be creative in terms of creating more value, either from the acquisition of Bitcoin or the yield generation part of it down the road.
How do you think through the media side, the marketing side of all of this? I learned today that, and of course these are rough numbers, maybe 40% of the investors in these Bitcoin Treasury companies are retail investors, and maybe around 60% are institutional investors. How do you think through that from a messaging standpoint? Because a retail audience on social media is very different from the guys and gals in suits in institutional offices, probably, right?
I think yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, they still focus on very similar metrics, I would say. But look, I think because Bitcoin in general still requires a lot of education, right? We talk about challenges and opportunity of being in this space. Are we early? Are we late? Is the space getting crowded? I think we're still so early on, and there's still a lot of education and just general authentic sharing that needs to happen to encourage more people, to join in. For example, like I was at a gathering in Lisbon a few days ago, right? And I was just chatting with other female YPO members, and then I was sharing what I'm doing. I'm around the food business, but I'm also doing Bitcoin accumulation strategy, and they are intrigued. And later on, they messaged me on LinkedIn. They're like, "Oh, I would love to hear more of your journey. Can you point me to different readings? I would want to make more Bitcoin investment, with more educated lens, and do it more confident as should happen, not just on social media, but in real life, day in and day out," right? Because I think us being in this space, we think it's getting crowded, but it's not. I mean, we take a step back, we talk to 10 people out of the day, probably 9% have not heard of, if not more, 9% have not heard of Bitcoin accumulation strategy. And they probably have not bought Bitcoin before, right? So I think it's important for us just to continue to share. And so just because the space, it needs sharing, I think social media is such an important channel and is a must for all companies like us. And we are definitely building that into our overall strategy. And the strategy, what we call it now, is SAT. Came up with one of my advisor. S stands for social, right? We have to build and engage a community with our followers. It's about creating a shared experience, right? Where everybody feels like they're part of the journey. A is always be buying. So we have to demonstrate, be focused. I wish we can say always be closing, right? But okay, always be buying. So A, that's great. And finally, T is just transparency. And that kind of loops back to the S, which is the social media where we can, in real time share what we're doing all the time. And having that transparency, very much like, for example, we are still early on and we're engaging with our followers. And some of them have pointed out like, hey, they would love to see a dashboard, right? Real-time metrics of what we're doing and how we measure ourselves. And we are building that right now. Hopefully we can launch that to market very soon. So once again, it's because we have the social media piece of it and we're listening to what our followers want. And that kind of helps us create that layer of transparency as well. And so down the road, maybe we have our own playbook. Maybe we can share our own playbook as well. And just kind of in general, share our processes, what worked, what didn't work, and hopefully bring more people into the space.
Can you share anything around your framework for basically a debt to equity ratio? Like Strategy has very publicly said they want to stay between a maximum of a 20 to 30% debt to equity ratio. And there's been a lot of chatter about, some of these companies are going to, take on even more leverage and, that might lead to some interesting outcomes. How do you think about what some might call a risk framework, I guess?
Yeah, I actually like that better. Like looking at it from a frameworks perspective rather than just zoning in on one metrics, this is the cutoff. Because I think we don't look at just one number, right? We're monitoring a range of numbers. For example, what we're constantly thinking is, okay, what if BTC drops by 50% tomorrow? What's that going to look like for us? Well, right now we're still okay, and we're probably going to buy a lot more if that happens. But, I think the more important question is how do we build DDC into a globally relevant and valuable Bitcoin Treasury company while making sure, we can continuously stack and maintain our Bitcoin positions during the next bear market. And we don't need to think about is it tomorrow, is it next week, or is it next year, whenever that may be. And I think as management, we want to make sure we have, healthy cash flow. We want to make sure that we have healthy net cash balance and cash position at all times. We also want to make sure that when we do debt financing, right, they do not come with heavy amounts or any amount of fixed financial obligations during the duration of the debt outstanding, right? I think those are, just very high level framework, the risk framework that you talked about. And I think it's important that we have this type of disciplinary framework in place to. And it's a moving target, right? These things are live and it's changing every day, but it's important to have that framework rather than I think just zoning in one numbers. So Tim, for this question, I'm not going to give you a number.
I like that. Keep it within a framework.
That's right.
This has been great. I guess I'll throw it over to you for closing thoughts, and if you can let people know where to find you and DDC online.
Sure. I'll say that, this week, having closed this really big financing is definitely a very significant and important and transformative time for DDC. Once again, truly grateful that we have really amazing partners for us during the fundraising process and being able to partner with Anson Funds, Animoca Brands, and a basket of well-known Bitcoin-focused investors from the community has been an incredible opportunity for me and DDC. Once again, we're very beginning of our Bitcoin journey, and I think now we're well positioned so that we can focus on execution and hopefully share a lot more good news with everybody in this community. Once again, Tim, thanks for having me here today. For those of you who are not familiar with me or DDC, you can find me and follow me on X. My X handle is DDC Norma, or you can also follow DDC corporate account at DDC BTC_.
Awesome. Norma, thanks for your time, and we look forward to following along on your journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim.
This episode is brought to you by Arch Lending, the premier provider of crypto-backed loans designed for both individual and institutional investors. At Arch, your digital assets work for you without selling them. Arch offers flexible loan options tailored to your needs. Backed by industry leaders like Morgan Creek Digital, Castle Island Ventures, and Galaxy Ventures, Arch Lending is setting a new standard in crypto-backed lending. Are you ready to unlock the potential of your crypto assets? Visit archlending.com to learn more and configure your loan today. Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Stampseed. If you're in cold storage, you know how important it is to protect your seed phrase. That's why I recommend you head over to stampseed.com and check it out for yourself. This seed phrase storage device is one solid piece of titanium. There are no loose pieces, and you can hammer your seed phrase in letter by letter. When you go to stampseed.com, use promo code TIM15 for a 15% discount across the website. That's TIM15.